Welcome to today's Top Rated Seller webinar. Our webinars are always free for all eBay sellers, and today we are blessed and excited to present the eBay Seller Protection Team. This is March 2013. Thank you so much for coming. We're just going to get a little bit of housekeeping done and make sure everybody knows what page we're on. Okay, see, housekeeping. No matter where you are, you got housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll make it available on our YouTube channel as soon as possible, usually within 24 hours. Yes, with the permission of the eBay staff, we will be able to give you these slides as a PDF, and that will also be available on our Top Rated Seller Webinars page on the pagemage.com website. If you're having audio problems and you're on the phone, the best choice for you is to probably just hang up, call back in. If you're on the computer and your computer is giving you audio issues, our best advice is simply use the call-in phone number. Forget the computer, try your phone. Stay connected to Top Rated Seller Webinars. You can sign up at pagemage.com/Top Rated Seller Webinars to get webinar info, selling tips, and seller advice. Be sure to stay connected. You can also stay connected in our very, very active Facebook group. We're over 580 as of this morning. And you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/TRS webinars. Join us and ask your questions. Our next webinar is how to spring clean your eBay store, presented by me, That Cat Simpson, on Wednesday, April 24th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Other upcoming webinars, you're not going to want to miss these. We've got Janelle Elms talking about multi-channel selling, Lisa Satora, sourcing for sellers, Sandy Garcia, Pinterest for business, and lots more. Sign up now, pagemage.com/Top Rated Seller Webinars. Don't forget our connectors. That's me, That Cat of thatcat.com, and Karen Locker of solutionsforecommerce.com. We want to make sure we thank our sponsors for the Top Rated Seller Webinars. Who are our sponsors? eBay Radio, where you've got the grift. Best way to find eBay Radio now is at ebayradio.com. We have more sponsors. We're also sponsored by Outright. Put your accounting on autopilot. Outright.com organizes your finances in one place. And Terapeak.com, because Terapeakers make more money on every eBay sale. Check out Terapeak.com. A few more sponsors you're going to love. PageMage.com. PageMage brings us billboards that make your eBay listing stand out, and Smart Gallery that lets you cross-sell what you want to promote. Both of our top 10 most popular apps in the eBay App Center. Our next sponsor is Stamps.com, where you can put your postage automatic from your PC. Make that automatic. Import all your orders from multiple marketplaces. Stamps.com also has a free program just for eBay sellers. And now we'll turn it over to all the eBay Seller Protection Team. Welcome, guys. Are you ready to take over?
We're ready.
All right. Have a great one.
Thank you. Hey everybody, so this is Rich Matsuura. I manage the Seller Protection Team over here at eBay. I have with me Jonathan Haney, who I think you'll see in a moment. Actually, if we flip back one slide, you can put a face to the whole Seller Protection Team, or much of the Seller Protection Team. And the first picture there will be a picture we're in San Jose. It's a lot of our San Jose team, and the second one is our Salt Lake team. So seeing a lot of the faces behind Seller Protection there. Let me really quickly talk to the agenda that we're going to go through, and then on the next page you'll see our pictures again. But the quick overview, we're going to spend a little bit of time, meet the team, going to talk about eBay Seller Protections and what we do and what are the various policies and programs we have in place to protect our sellers. There's some help that we need from the community, so we'll talk about how we can partner together. And we're going to spend a decent amount of time, I'd say over half of the program, going into Q&A. Now, a couple of logistics. What we can answer. We're going to be able to answer questions when we get to the Q&A around the various protections we provide. We're going to be able to talk about how to handle some typical situations that come up inside of seller protection. This would not be the forum to go into very individual instances of abuse. So we can't talk about specific instances of abuse on this channel, nor can we talk about open cases. But we do have a report of buyer that we're going to be talking about in a minute, or near the end of this presentation, where we can talk about where you would submit those instances of abuse. We also have our resolution center to handle any current open cases. So just want to make sure we're setting context around the type of questions that we're going to be taking at the end of this program. Meet the team. So here's myself and Jonathan, who I have with me. He's a senior manager of seller protection. Both of us will be presenting here and answering questions together. We also have a couple of folks who will be joining us from some of the teams that we work closely with to help answer questions at the end as well. One from our buyer protection team and one from our top-rated seller team. So we'll have a good panel of folks that can be answering these questions once we get to that Q&A period. Let's just kick off really quickly with if you jump to one more slide, our Apple slide. There's one reason I put the Apple slide in here. I know that a lot of times we have people that are new to selling on eBay, selling within or listening in on these type of webinars. And the one thing that I just want to highlight, whenever we start talking about seller protection, if we jump into the seller protection piece, it sounds like that there's a lot of bad apples out there in terms of buyers. We don't have a lot of bad apples out there. Most transactions on eBay go fantastic. And as we're going through this presentation, I just want to make sure that folks are clear that we're talking about not the majority use case. And I don't want to scare off the new buyers. It's a fantastic marketplace. We have fantastic sellers. We have fantastic buyers. And a lot of good apples out there. But let me jump to the next slide here. Occasionally, we know that this happens sometimes, right? We know that sellers sometimes feel like there are certain buyers that beat them up. And whenever we show this slide to sellers, it's interesting. It's like, yeah, you know what? I do feel like that sometimes as a seller, and as a seller myself, I have felt like this before as well. So what does the seller protection team do? We are working to actively remove these type of buyers from the site. We have, I'll say we have three things that we focus on. One is delivering quality buyers. So really making sure that the buyers that are purchasing on eBay are high quality buyers that are going to create good transactions for you. Second is the ability to protect your feedback. We know feedback is essential to the success of your business and protecting your business itself. So as we walk through this presentation, you're going to hear about the various programs that we have in place that land in each one of these three buckets. Now I'm going to stop here. We have a quick video. I think over the webinar, the best thing to do here is to have everyone just listen to the video offline. This is a YouTube video. When you click on that link, does the click work? Do the links work off of the presentation?
Good launch.
Okay, fantastic. Why don't we put everybody on? I'm going to put ourselves on mute for two minutes while the video plays. Download it and take a quick view.
Okay, guys, quick change of direction here. I'm going to put the mic as close as I can. I've got my sound turned up all the way. We will give you a link to this at the end of the presentation, but please enjoy.
We have a dedicated seller protection team working around the clock for our sellers. And it's because of our sellers that we have such a great marketplace.
Why does eBay have seller protection? Because we're dedicated to creating a fair and safe marketplace for all buyers and sellers. Our sellers bring tremendous value to the site, so we're constantly evolving our seller protection measures based on your feedback to make eBay the best place to sell. With our recent enhanced seller protection program, you can now sell with greater confidence.
Seller protection team does two things. We deliver quality buyers and create a fair marketplace for our sellers. We have a seller protection policy in place that clearly spells out how you're covered. This includes things like our feedback remover policy, our auto 5 stars, and we're going to continue to expand that in the future. We encourage you to check it out. Of course, we also have our corresponding buyer policy that lets buyers know what's expected of them. We have great buyers on the site, and most transactions go fantastic. But we know we have a small fraction of buyers. Sometimes they don't play by the rules. We put the technology in place to identify those buyers, and we have a team in place to remove those buyers from the site. We have a dedicated seller protection team working around the clock for our sellers. And it's because of our sellers that we have such a great marketplace.
we're working hard to make eBay an even safer place to sell.
Now, if you could not hear that, that video is available at www.ebay.com/sellerprotection. Let me flip back to the presentation real quick, and Rich, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, the one thing I would highlight from that video is, so we had Christopher Payne join me, which was fantastic. Christopher Payne, essentially he heads up our marketplaces division here at eBay. The one thing that we have heard in the past, and I do hear this sometimes from sellers, is at eBay, do you guys, can we do more for our sellers, and can we focus more on our sellers on these various programs and protections? The one thing that I will highlight is there's an absolute commitment, not just from the seller protection team, but up through the organization here at eBay to really make a difference for our sellers this year. So there is, what we're presenting to you now is going to be, here's what we have available today, but there's going to be quite a few changes up and coming. So continue to watch these type of forums for new announcements, because there's a lot of momentum within eBay to make sure we're creating a fair and safe marketplace for our sellers. The next slide here, we talk about the official eBay seller protection policy. Now this is, to a certain degree, it's brand new, right? A lot of the policies here that we're talking about have existed on the site for some time. The reason we wrap this up into a single policy is we wanted one place to go for sellers to learn about the various policies that eBay has in place to protect them. And one of the things that we heard from sellers is there was a lot of low awareness of our seller protection policies, and because it wasn't in one easy to find place. So the first goal of this was, let's get it all into one easy to find place. Second goal is, here's our document going forward that we will, like I just mentioned, continue to update with new programs and new policies as we launch them through the year. This is the policy they're going to go into. So this is where you'll always see the latest information on seller protection and seller protection policies. Now, let me talk at a very high level at how seller protection delivers, and then Jonathan will start going into more of the details around these various programs. As I mentioned before, deliver quality buyers, protect feedback, and protect your business. The first thing that we have here, under that first picture with the team, dedicated global protection team. So we have about 50 people over here working at eBay, which are dedicated to protecting our sellers. So it's a large investment eBay is making to move forward to make sure that we're creating the safe and fair marketplace for our selling community. The second one, advanced technology. Jonathan will talk about this in a bit more detail, but we have algorithms in place, we have a team in place that are managing this to go out and identify what we'll call the abusive buyers on the site, the picky buyers on the site. And what we're doing in those cases is making sure that we're either rehabilitating them or just suspending them and getting rid of those buyers so they're no longer causing problems. So we have what we call a detection model to detect those patterns of behavior, to make sure we're keeping a clean site for sellers to transact on. Next one is the official seller protection policy. That one we just talked about. This one is, again, we just launched this a couple of weeks ago, brand new in terms of let's have this policy in place, and this is going to be the place we continue to update. And then the last one is the voice of the sellers. And this is where, on the one side, we're getting out to a lot of meetups, to a lot of the various events that eBay hosts, and just a lot of visiting of our sellers, talking to our sellers to make sure their voice is getting heard. What we want to hear is, what are the biggest pain points that we need to address this year, where our team can be focused on making your lives better and your lives easier in transacting on the site. So we're getting out there today. I think as we go into the Q&A at the end, would love for any suggestions and any comments on what else we can be doing better. Feel free to bring them up during that portion of the show. And then I think here we're going to transfer over to Jonathan. So what Jonathan's going to do is start going in deeper into the very specifics of what I just talked about.
So good morning, everyone. What I'm going to plan to do is those three starbursts we saw on the other side, I'm going to walk through each of those in turn. The first one I want to walk through is around delivering quality buyers. First and foremost, this is a policy that we have launched last fall, and this really was our first foray into setting some buyer requirements, some buyer standards, buying practices. And so what you'll see here is there's a list of things that we now have on our site in, again, a consolidated manner of things that we don't allow our buyers to do. And they're simple things. Not paying for an item. If you buy it, you should pay for it. Don't make unreasonable demands. You know, don't ask for the moon and not be willing to pay for it. Make sure that the feedback is appropriate and fair. Don't abuse our buyer protection programs. Use those for what they're intended for. And then finally, with returns, we have some clear guidelines for buyers and sellers on how they should utilize the return process, and then how to reach out to eBay from the seller side if they feel like there's misuse. Really, the idea of these is foundational expectations for both our buyers and sellers so that they know what a fair transaction is. And we feel like this is vital and important to letting our sellers focus on delivering the wow experience and not having to worry about buyers who may not be following the rules.
Hey, Jonathan, the one thing to add here, which I think is an interesting point, another reason why we launched this is as we were going down this path of suspending the abusive buyers and getting them off of the site, we wanted to have a clear place to send those buyers to make sure that they were clear that we had this policy in place, saying, hey, we're expecting buyers to follow this set of rules, and if you don't, we can get rid of you off of the site.
That's actually a very fair point, Rich, and that actually ties into how do we enforce this policy. You know, first and foremost, let me start off by saying our goal is not to kick buyers off the site, and the reason why our goal is that because that's lost sales and lost revenue for you, our sellers. Our goal is to work with those buyers to make sure that we can help reform them into following the eBay norms of the transaction, or eBay norms of the transactional experience. What we do is, you know, Rich highlighted big data. We have a large, you know, 250-odd, some-odd variable model that looks at all aspects of the transaction, including what you, the sellers, tell us about the transaction. We call it IRNA, which is a Hindi word which means third eye. And in essence, it scans every transaction and every buyer that goes through these transactions and helps us to determine if we see riskiness in it. For those that we do see riskiness in, we actually have a team that proactively identifies and reviews these accounts, and as we see policy violations, we will go out and we will educate, we will warn, restrict, and then, you know, unfortunately we will suspend. As I said, that's the last resort that we go to. It's not necessarily the first resort. So there may be many instances where if you have reported a buyer or we have taken action on a buyer, we're in that reforming process, so you may not see the precise outcome of a buyer getting kicked off the site, but please know that there are instances where we are actively trying to model our buying behavior. That being said, while we do that with the buyer, we also want to take care of the seller. So we do remove related feedback and buyer protection claims from your record for those buyers who we are working through the reforming process on. Next, wanted to move over to the second starburst, which is around protecting feedback. And in this one, wanted to highlight it in some of our programs that had fairly well coverage and knowledge, but it helps to kind of understand why these programs are out there. And so that's why I just kind of want to walk through our 5-star program. So as many people are aware, when a buyer comes in and they rate a transaction, they provide a positive, neutral, or negative rating, and then they answer a set of 4 detailed seller rating questions. You can see the questions on the bottom of the screen. For 3 of those questions, we actually have an opportunity to automatically 5-star those questions. And let me walk through each of those scenarios right now. Starting at the bottom, what we call our ship cost DSR, or our ship cost detailed seller rating. If you offer a free shipping option and then the buyer selects that free shipping solution, we feel like there is no reason that buyer needs to judge you on your shipping and handling costs because they were free. In essence, there's no need to judge, and so we've put 5 stars in there for that very reason. Similarly, with the ship time detailed seller rating score, we offer an automatic 5-star here when you specify a 1-day handling time in your listing, you upload tracking by the next business day, and the item is confirmed delivered within 4 business days. In essence, for the buyer, that's a 5-day since payment is received transaction, and we feel like that is an acceptable experience, a 5-star experience, and so we give you the 5 stars. The next one is around communications. This is our newest 5-star treatment, and this one actually has raised a lot of questions in the community, and I want to address this one. So first of all, the rules. You specify 1-day handling time, you upload tracking by the next business day, and there's no communication between you and the buyer. In essence, what we're doing here is we're offering the 5-star rating because there is nothing for that buyer to judge the transaction on. And so if the buyer were to put in a star, it would essentially be arbitrary. And as we look at it, making sure that you have the 1-day handling time and making sure you upload tracking should answer the majority of their questions. And as long as they have those 2 data points, we feel like you as the seller has done your part in communication. And hence, if there's any additional communication, and if the buyer doesn't ask, then there's nothing to judge on, and so it should be a 5-star experience. Not because, but because it's almost like a no grade, and this is the way we've decided to no grade it.
Hey, Jonathan, this is an interesting one that we get questions about from our sellers. And the question I think we get the most about this one is, hey, eBay, why are you telling me not to communicate with my buyer? Right? And what I would say to this one is that's not what we're telling you to do. I think you know your customers, and you know that in we know in a lot of transactions it makes absolute sense to communicate with the buyer. Some of you send out the thank you notes, right, which is fantastic. So some of you want to continue to answer questions, especially in higher priced goods or in collectibles and such, that there's a lot of back and forth between the buyer and seller even after the transaction happens. And what we're saying in those cases is fantastic. We keep that up. The use case, the specific question we would get from sellers here is, hey, eBay, it feels like I did all the right thing. I specified a 1-day handling. I uploaded that tracking number, and the buyer never even tried to contact me, and I got dinged on I got a 1-star or 2-star for my DSR. Like, how is that fair? And it's that specific use case where we said, yeah, that doesn't feel like it's fair. Let's give the out of 5 stars. So I just don't want folks to necessarily say, hey, change your business practice. If that's what's working for you, keep on doing it. But for this specific use case, we wanted to make sure that you were covered.
Thanks, Rich. Next, I want to swing over and cover a series of automated protections that we have. And these are things that you as a seller don't have to do anything with. They just occur. So the first one I'd like to highlight is picky buyer. So in essence, if you think about a buyer whose average DSR score is, say, 2.5, we realize that that's much, much lower than the site-wide average, and that's not reflective of what the general population feels. We're going to look at that buyer as an outlier, and we're going to not include any of that feedback as we go through any of our standards evaluations efforts. Similarly, if there's an external event outside your control, say Superstorm Sandy or a postal strike, we will proactively go in and de-score feedback and claims to make sure that you are not affected on that. And then we also clearly communicate that through our AB posts. Honestly, I think the most recent was a couple months ago. There was a blizzard in the Northeast, and we did it for that period. Finally, buyers who don't pay can't leave feedback. So when an unpaid item case is opened and it closes without payment, we will not allow any feedback to be left on that transaction. And then finally, if just 1 or 2 buyers are leaving the vast majority of your low detailed seller ratings, we are actually going to look over those and say the rest of the buying community believes in this seller, and we are going to take their opinion over the vocal minority of a few. And so we have that program that goes in place and actually happens and runs every month.
And we do get to, so on that last one, I think this is an important one, because one of the concerns before we launched this program was we were hearing from sellers, hey, I just sold 10 things to one buyer and they left me a whole bunch of negative feedbacks. That's going to kick me out of ETRS, for example. And we're saying that can't happen, right? With this protection in place and when this runs, this protects our sellers from being able to get knocked out of top rated because of a single buyer, a small number of buyers who are purchasing a whole bunch of items and leaving a lot of negative feedback.
Let me now swing on and let me talk about how we protect your business. The first thing that I want to highlight is we're actually changing our eBay buyer protection case decisioning process. And before we encouraged buyers to contact sellers before opening a case, now we're enforcing it. So let me walk through a quick three-step process. Starting April 9th, if a buyer has an issue and they go to any of the normal spots that a buyer goes, even to send you even to write you a member-to-member message, we're gonna bring all of those messages through the Resolution Center if it's related to an item not received or item not described complaint. Reason we're doing this is because we found that the centralization is actually helpful for sellers as they work to manage these cases. That being said, I know many of you know today that open cases count within seller standards starting April 9th, and with the April standards evaluation, no longer. Big X through that one. Now let's move on to step 2 of the process. And this is where you as a seller will get notified that you have an issue open, and you'll have 3 business days to resolve that. And that's capped at 3 business days. As many of you guys will look through, we find that most of the cases at least have communications that start within those 3 business days. And we're giving you, with this new process, new tools to resolve that case. And then the final point is, after those business days, buyers can escalate the case to eBay and for us to review and resolve. Fairly similar to today's approach. That being said, as we look at the cases that come out, only those that are resolved against the seller will count in seller standards, not those that are decided against the buyer or decided as nobody's fault. I feel like this is a good move for both our buying and selling community. We also have heard that there's a lot of churn out there on this, so wanted to kind of lay out the updated process, and we've asked Christy from our EVP team to join so we can answer and address any questions in detail. That being said, within this new process, we're still going to have the same seller safeguards. And that is, again, as cases are found in your favor, those are removed from your record. Secondly, for item not received cases specifically, as long as you ship within your stated handling time, you provide tracking information, and you provide proof of delivery before you or the buyer asks eBay to make a final decision. So before step 3 on that prior slide, we will protect you. The other way that protecting business is honestly prevention. What we have found as we go out and talk to buyers, and our fellow buying colleagues do, we find that buyers want their items fast. So we find actually a correlation here for those sellers that provide fast shipping and delivery options. They are the ones that are more successful. We also find that buyers want to know where their stuff is. That is the core reason why we instituted the upload tracking requirement for the top-rated seller program last year, is to address that pain point. If they want to know where in the system it is. We talked about this a bit as we talked about the Auto 5-star. Buyers want to know that you're there if needed. So as buyers ask questions, be responsive. Make sure that you have that open line of communication. And we find that 99 times out of 100, that solves the vast majority of all concerns. And then finally, what we find is 100% satisfied buyers come back to you, the sellers, as well as to eBay generally. So, consider providing a generous return policy because that just continues to facilitate the transaction. And then on the item description specifically, kind of the key word is make it crystal clear. You know, as you think about your item description, what we're finding is that buyers are increasingly not reading their listings, and they're, number one, and number two, we're seeing a dramatic increase in the use of smartphones and of tablets, and in those two worlds, a picture tells 1,000 words. So take advantage of the 12 free pictures that we offer on the eBay site. Upload large pictures that actually will show up and you can zoom in on. I think that will be very helpful. The other thing is clearly call out your terms and conditions and write them in simple language. Buyers will skim that, so make sure that the key and relevant and salient points stand out. And then another thing that we find that some buyers don't know about is the buyer requirements section. And you can actually go in and add buyer requirements to your listing and to your account, and that helps you choose which buyers you want to serve. So that's what we had on protections. The last thing I wanted to highlight is it's really you plus us at eBay is what's going to deliver a fair and safe marketplace. And so now let's talk about that. So what we're asking for from you is we're asking you to help us expand our horizons on those buyers and those transactional issues that we may not see in the data that we have. So that's where if you have a transaction that you feel like has gone wrong, please use the report a buyer function. You can see it here. If you're on if you're on your My eBay, it's over under the right under More Actions, report a buyer. You can also go to www.ebay.com/reportabuyer, and there's a link there, and that takes you into a flow where you get to select the transaction. Once you click that button, you're going to be asked essentially for two pieces of information. Well, you know, kind of two reasons, and then some optional comments. You click Submit. That's all you have to do. It is totally anonymous. This is information that gets shared with eBay directly, and we pull this into that large detection model that I highlighted earlier in the presentation, and use that as part of our risk modeling as we identify the most risky buyers. Now, what we're going to give you is if we've taken an action to protect you, we'll let you know. Once a month, we send out this email, and this is what we internally call the You've Been Protected email, where we talk about everything that eBay has done to protect your selling account in terms of removing feedback, removing cases, removing low DSRs, as well as that protection from 1 to 2 buyers that we highlighted earlier in the presentation, and in a way to tell you a report card of here's what we're doing on our side to help you with your transaction. I want to now stop and jump in and talk about the actions we have taken on these reports and these emails that you've received. So what we've seen is over 1.5 million reports have been submitted since mid-October. So great news. That's a six-time increase in the reports that were submitted post-report a buyer versus those that were submitted pre-report a buyer. That has actually enabled us to increase our buying restriction rate. It's one of our kind of medium severity consequences as we work at reforming the buying population by 4.5 times. And it's been able to give us the insights to increase the number of accounts that we've identified as suspension worthy by a 9x increase. So I would just like to say one big thank you to you, our selling community, for your partnership in this, and continue to see good things ahead as we use this.
Hey, Jonathan, one thing to highlight on this one, to reiterate the thank you for those who have submitted these reports. As you can see by this data, this information has been extremely helpful in getting us this. I'm going to reiterate what Jonathan essentially said, but I think it's a really important point. This data that sellers are submitting to us has made it really just made our program to go after the buyers that are causing problems a lot more effective. There's a lot about a transaction eBay doesn't see. We don't see if somebody sends a brick in the box back as a return, or something sent back as in a different condition than it was originally sent out as. We also know that a lot of these reports, with over 1.5 million reports submitted so far, we do see some sellers who are just submitting every negative they get. So there's a lot of these that we don't necessarily take action on. But when we see those multiple reports and we see a buyer getting reported by 2 sellers, this is something that's been helping us immensely to start driving up with that team that we're talking about, with enforcing the abuse of buyers, immensely with getting to the bad buyers faster. So again, thank you for the participation there.
Cool. Wanted to also highlight on the seller dashboard, we actually highlight here's all the actions that we've taken to protect you, and you can find that at the link. We'll have actually all the links at the end of the presentation. And then finally, all of this information, including the video we started off with, is available at www.ebay.com/sellerprotection. It's really the hub and the center for all of the information. And what you see out there today, we are actively working to continue to deepen and to sharpen and to make it much more usable for you guys, our selling community. So with that, we want to move into the question and answer period.
So what we could do here is we have a number of questions that were submitted via the chat. So I'm going to start walking through some of those. Before I get started, do we have
Christy is on the line.
Fantastic. Hey, Christy, can you say something to make sure we can hear you okay?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, Christy. So Christy is from our buyer protection team. And so with these some of the questions specifically around buyer protection and some of the changes that we're making that Jonathan had specified, Christy will be our expert to be able to answer those. So.
So, real quick, let me walk through a couple more slides, and then we'll get into the questions. So, number one, Rich highlighted this earlier. We need the voice of the seller. Please give us your suggestions. You can see it. The website is www.ebay.com/sellerprotection-suggestions. You'll find there an easy box to give us those suggestions. We're not going to be able to respond to each of the emails, so please use that, but know that that's more for our internal listening. And then wanted to leave this as we enter into Q&A with all of the helpful links that we've talked through today.
Great. So why don't we start walking through the list of some of the questions we get. It's kind of in a random order, I think, as they were coming in, and we just have them printed out. Let's see if we get through all of these. Going to start with unpaid item. We have a couple of questions here. So the first one is, why aren't buyers required to pay right away when they win an auction? Why are they given 4 days before an unpaid item dispute can be opened? So two questions wrapped into one. Why don't I start with this one, Jonathan, and feel free to chime in. So let me start with the first part. So why do we not require buyers to pay right away with an auction? I'd say this is something that I'd love for us to get into a world where buyers pay right away when they win an auction. The biggest detriment, and we've done a lot of research on this one, I think the biggest detriment to us moving strongly in this direction is when we get new buyers onto the site. eBay, say one of the ways we get a lot of new buyers on the site is it's easy to start engaging, especially inside of auctions, with a quick registration and you just start bidding. As soon as we put additional hurdles, and some of the things we've experimented in the past, as soon as you start putting additional hurdles in the engagement process from buyers, so hey, give us a credit card number, we start seeing a pretty big drop-off on the number of buyers, new buyers that are coming to the site. So here we need to balance. Right? We need to balance the want to get rid of and start pushing down the number of unpaid items on the site, because when we're talking about frequency of bad selling experiences, unpaid items is number one. But also need to balance we're not going to break our new buyer business. And I think this is probably the biggest concern that we have in moving in this world, into the world where it's an immediate pay when someone wins. My second point here is, why are they given 4 days before an unpaid item dispute can be opened? I'm going to say that I agree. That's too long. So look for announcements in the near future where we're to be able to get those times shortened. Can't divulge details yet, but I will. And we've been hearing this feedback from the sellers for some time that this is too long of a period. So watch for announcements on changes to this area coming soon.
Received another question around UPIs. When a buyer doesn't pay, there is a non-paying bidder strike put on their account. Why can't sellers see when the buyer has one of these strikes against them? And the listing tools, you can choose to block bidders with 2 strikes, but not 1. Why? Great question, and a bit of the answer lies in how what we talked about it and where unpaid items come from. As we've looked internally at our data around unpaid items, we find that the vast majority of unpaid items come from buyers who just don't know the eBay system. And so they win an auction and then they don't know what to do next, or they have a PayPal account and it takes them a long time to get the PayPal account registered. And in that manner, they're actually good buyers that as they come and make their second, third, fourth transaction, we find that they make them and they make them successfully and they stay as long-term buyers. It's just that learning curve of eBay is so steep, and we're working to flatten it. But right now it's so steep that's why we have a lot of these first-time UPI strikes. Again, as I highlight, the detection systems and our fraud engines that we have are looking for indicators like this, coupled with, are there other fraud factors that may indicate that this account is not what it says it is, and we do take those accounts out. However, for those good buyers, we want them to come back. We want them to continue to purchase, and that's part of the reason why we allow you to block with 2 strikes, but not with a single strike. And then again, a question around visibility, and the piece I would answer with visibility is really a statement that in general, we eBay should be managing these types of buyers, and we do, and we actively are engaging in that through the stuff that we're seeing here, and we're working to reform them. And if we see buyers who aren't reforming, we are exiting them off of our platform. But we want to protect the buyer's privacy just as much as we protect the seller's privacy with report a buyer, and that's why we leave some of the information, such as the unpaid items, off of the list.
Great. Let's jump to, I know, Christy, we have you on the phone. I'm guessing people are tired of just hearing from me and Jonathan. So why don't we move over to you, Christy, with some of the buyer protection process changes. The first one, if you could just talk to, real quick question. So we're moving from 7 days to 3 days, is that right?
Hey everyone, good question, Rich. Thanks for looping me, and I'm excited to be a part of this. So the question is it moving from 7 days to 3 days? And that's correct. It is moving to 3 business days. And so what that means is it'll actually be Monday through Friday minus federal holidays. So the reason we've done this is we've seen that sellers actually resolve the buyer's issue in this time most of the time. And if the case isn't filed on a Monday or Tuesday, you'll still have 7 days in most situations since we're using business days.
And then there's another part of this, Christy, as well, and tell me if you're the expert on this one. But there's absolutely, and I know we're talking to sellers here, but we didn't make that change from 7 days to 3 days for sellers. We made this one for buyers, because what we were hearing from buyers is, when I'm having a problem, waiting a full 7 days to get this resolved was problematic. It was probably one of the biggest complaints that we were hearing through the buyer protection process. And folks who were going through the end of this, kind of the long process, were less likely to continue buying, and we were just getting some, when we're talking about churn of buyers and wanting them to keep on buying, this was one of the big aspects that your team felt like it needed to address. So there's Jonathan mentioned, there's a buyer component here as well as a seller component, but wanted to make sure that I think that's the big reason we made that change.
Yes, absolutely. We want to make sure we're retaining those buyers for our great sellers. And the other a good thing about the 3 business days that I didn't mention before, I was planning to mention, is the other benefit for sellers, though, is that it is locked down. So what that means is that today, if you've ever had a case opened against you, the buyer opens it and you respond, the buyer can then step in and escalate to customer support immediately. So it could all happen within 1 day. So in the new process, the time will actually be locked down. So that means you'll have the 3 full business days to resolve it with the buyer, because like Rich mentioned earlier in the presentation, we do want our buyers and our sellers working together on these issues, and so that will give you the full 3 days to work it out. Whereas in the past, we saw sometimes where a seller would respond, say from their mobile or from work, and say, hey, I do have this information, but it's not available. I'll send it when I get home. And in those cases, sometimes the buyer could escalate, whereas now the seller will have the opportunity to say, hey, I'll look into this for you. Thanks for reporting it. I'll get back to you. And then they can come back with more details. So I think that should be helpful for a seller, I hope.
That's a great point, because one of the things we were hearing from sellers before is, hey, you're saying 7 days, but I had this escalate on me in 2 days or 1 day, right? Due to the you just mentioned. So one other positive is, yeah, we're actually locking down this 3-day period, and the buyer has to wait this 3 days into working it out with the seller before escalating. So that's a good call. Let me add another question related to this. So about the buyer issue resolution, where the seller has 3 days to resolve the issue, what if you respond ASAP, but the buyer does not? I've had many situations where the buyer doesn't respond to a message for 2 or more days.
Thanks, Rich. That's another good question. So when this happens, unfortunately, we're really just going to have to probably suggest that you do your best to wait to hear back from the buyer. But the good news is it leads into what we just mentioned, is that it's locked down. So say, for example, that you respond to your buyer and you're waiting to have information and come back. The good news is you can go back to the Resolution Center and follow up with them or add additional information. So if you're not hearing from them, you can continue to keep adding information into the Resolution Center that would eventually be available to customer support if the decision has to come to us. So I say we just ask you to try to be patient with them when this happens, because sometimes they're not as active online as we are as sellers, and so just try to be patient and remember that you can always continue adding information and details into the Resolution Center.
Great.
I think, Christy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's also up to the buyers to escalate the case to the buyer protector, to eBay, and to our buyer protection team to resolve the case. And so, in essence, while they could escalate at the end of 3 business days, if there's a good running dialogue between the buyer and the seller, or if we see the seller keep reaching out but we don't see responses from the buyer, those are instances, one, where the buyer may not escalate at 3 days, and point 2, that as we go through the case decisioning process, the teammate that reviews that would look at the full cadre of the transaction, correct?
Absolutely, definitely. Good call out for sure.
So let me add one more point to I think this discussion, which I think Jonathan had already covered during the presentation. But as we're launching new programs like this one that you're talking about here, Christy, there's still teams here at eBay. Christy is part of this other team, which focuses on enhancing the buyer experience. I'd say the one difference that we're trying to make this year is when we are making changes to the buyer experiences, we are working pretty closely with these teams, the seller protection team, working closely with those teams to make sure that we're getting some of the seller benefits in there as well. And the other big seller benefit that we got inside of this change is that open cases no longer count against the seller inside of standards. Right? And just to re-highlight and reiterate that point, the only cases that are going to count against sellers are those that were eBay ruled against the seller. So I'd say that's one of the other big benefits from a claims perspective.
Definitely, for sure.
So let me add there's one more buyer protection question here, Christy. I think this might be more feedback related than the buyer protection, so I'll take the first cut of the answer, but it's what if a buyer leaves a low DSR for item not as described, but doesn't contact you first. Will anything in this new claims process help deal with this? And I'd say the answer to that is no. This version that's going out, there's nothing that changes the what a buyer can do as far as leaving the DSR score. But this also, there's two questions in here. I'm going to roll another question from earlier, kind of the question, why does a buyer not have to contact the seller before leaving a negative feedback or low DSR score? The reason why we don't currently ask buyers to contact the seller before leaving a negative feedback is this is another area where we need to continue to get this signal from buyers around when something has gone wrong. This is the biggest lever we have when separating good buyers versus bad, or good sellers versus bad sellers, and starting to push those bad sellers kind of off of eBay. And I think we've done quite a bit in the past where we separated good from the bad, and a lot of the changes we've made in the past have been our ability to get a lot of feedback from the system so we can separate out good from bad. And it helps in our standards program. It helps our good sellers to get a lot of that signal. We've run tests, again, another place where we've run tests in the past, and whenever we put a hurdle inside of the feedback flow, we start losing a lot of that ability for us to see when a transaction goes wrong. So this is an area that I think we need to still continue to test our way into. I think there's still areas, I'll be the first to admit, I think there's improvements we can make to the feedback system, but our feedback system has been our primary driver to get us to this more trusted marketplace for our buyers, and has been driving a lot of success to get a lot of buyers on the site as well. So we will continue to work with our feedback team to make sure that we could get some improvements in there, but there's still, the primary reason we don't have that contact today is that hurdle would actually hurt the marketplace considerably in terms of overall trust. As part of this, and let me address another part of this question. I think the first one was alluding to, when a seller wins a claim, they're still exposed to this negative feedback, right? And that's another question here, kind of alluding to that. And I'll agree that this one doesn't feel fair at all, right? For a seller to now have eBay rule in their favor and then get a negative feedback and a low DSR score, I'd say this is another one. Nothing to officially announce yet, but watch our upcoming announcements. I think we're going to have some good news to address some of this in the very near future. So let's go on to Christy. That covered at least the current set of buyer protection questions I have. Might possibly more to come, but let me jump to another section on.
Yeah, let's talk through feedback. And actually, Rich, part of your answer was a great segue into that. Scan through the questions that were here, and one of these is one that we get all the time, which is, how can I figure out what my DSRs are for an individual transaction? Why are my DSRs anonymous? Two ways of asking the same question. The third way is, I want to use my detailed seller ratings as a coaching and an improvement tool. Why don't you give me that ability? So to answer this. One, we need to find a way to give you this information as a coaching vehicle. And actually on the seller dashboard there is a coaching module where we actually look at your DSRs, and we, based on thresholds and what we see there, we apply some algorithms to say, here's what we think the best coaching is for you based on your performance to help you increase your performance as well as your sales. So we're doing it at an aggregate level. We don't give you the deep dive into, how does my DSRs look for my express shipments versus my free shipments. We need to do a better job of that. So that's one piece. But then the second piece around why don't we give out this individual information is the question is, or the answer is really something that Rich highlighted, which is the accurate information. We found that when we say that, or when we made DSRs anonymous, we have received much clearer feedback from our buying community around our sellers' performance versus when we tell our buying community that these DSRs and the detailed information for a specific transaction will be shared publicly. We find that private versus public divide causes a reduction in the quality of information that we receive, which then turns around to not enable us to leverage our programs as effectively, be it our top-rated seller program, be it our coaching modules, be it even some of the internal risk processes that we go through internally. And it's really the quality and the accuracy of that information is why we don't make that public.
Hey, Jonathan, let me ask you another question on feedback that came through. Also, does the automatic 5-star feedback policy cover abusive feedback that is related? For example, if you receive automatic 5-star for ship time, but the buyer leaves a negative feedback referencing slow ship time, can this be considered for feedback removal? And I could take the first cut of this one. I'd say, so at this point, no. We're still taking in negative feedback, and when we're looking at negative feedback, it still goes back to what Jonathan was mentioning. We want to make sure that if a buyer is having a poor experience, we want to make sure we're getting that captured. It's number one. But number two, I think what this is highlighting is an opportunity for us to, and this is something we've been working with the feedback team on. Nothing to announce in the near term here because it's a big change to the marketplace and the ecosystem. Some things that we're looking at and testing and such. But I think we need to absolutely move the feedback system into a world of more objectivity versus subjectivity. And in a place where we see ship time and ship costs are the two biggest opportunities we have for us. We are working with the feedback team to see what we can do to get more objective in some of those areas. But so this is realize there's areas of concern here for the seller, working with the feedback team to see what we can do to better address. Why don't we go through the 5-star questions here, since kind of go down in order. Next one is, if the customer chooses free shipping, I know an automatic 5-star will be left, but can it be manually adjusted?
Absolutely not. If we put in a 5-star, we actually do not let the buyer leave any rating whatsoever. So it's a 5-star, it's a 5-star.
And the next one is about auto 5-star for communication. Does the communication have to be after the sale? What if they ask a question prior to placing an order?
No, it can be any time prior to leaving feedback. It has to be clear of communication for the auto 5-star. If there was communication back and forth at any time in the transaction prior to leaving feedback, then the 5-star is removed. Or the 5-star is not automatically left. It's up to the buyer to determine what to rate that transaction.
The next one is how satisfied were you with the seller's communication? When a buyer asks a question after the sale, your automatic 5-star rating is gone. If buyers know this is the policy, they can ask a question and nullify your automatic 5-star for communication.
Well, your statement is true. However, what I would highlight here is if they're doing that just to ding you on your detailed seller ratings score, my hunch is you may not be the first person where this has happened, and this buyer has a pattern of doing that. And that's where our detection systems would pick up this type of behavior. However, if they're doing that and they have a legitimate gripe or a legitimate complaint, as long as you act in a responsive and professional manner, I doubt that the buyer will leave you a 1 or a 2-star for communication, which from a seller standards perspective are the 2 scores that you should be the most concerned about.
And then so here's another feedback question. Once we go through this, we'll start jumping to some other topics as well. I know we're going deep into feedback. Our gripe with neutral or negative feedback has always been that the buyer rarely contacts us first. We talked about that. But in our case, it has virtually always been that the buyer did not read the listing size or color. So to shorten this one up, it's, hey, the buyer didn't read the description. I got a negative feedback, and it was obvious that they didn't read the description. I'd say there are cases today where we still will allow a buyer to leave that negative feedback because we see a number of cases where the seller could have written the description better or made it more clear. We see a lot of sellers and a lot of listings where it's filled with a lot of policy information above the information about the description of the item. And we also see a lot of places where the font looks like it's trying to hide information about the description or condition of the item. So there's still a case where we want to make sure we're capturing that feedback. Now, that being said, I think there is absolutely an opportunity, and this is, again, nothing specific to announce in this particular webinar, but something to watch our announcements going forward around there's more we can do to expand our feedback removal policies. Where those are going to show up is in our seller protection policy, and we link over to this feedback removal policy. We're continuing to work with the feedback team to make sure we can expand out the feedback removal policies to cover those cases where we're hearing from our sellers are just unfair. So that's something we're, again, look for future announcements on this, something my team is focusing on right now.
Perfect. I want to flip over. We have a number of questions around international, or what we call cross-border trade. Rich, let me ask you some of these questions. So first of all, seller protection U.S.-based.
Seller protection, so there's two parts of seller protection. A lot of what we're doing on seller protection with looking at buyers, what Jonathan was talking about, is we are looking at buyers globally. We have teams across the globe that are looking at these buyers and suspending buyers who are not just U.S.-based buyers, but who are taking advantage of these various protections in the buyer protection program, abusing feedback. We're looking at buyers globally from that respect. I know there are certain parts of our program which are more difficult to get protections on internationally. And very specifically, we know that there's the issue with it's hard to get tracking, or in certain cases impossible to economically get tracking to all the places that they're doing business. This turns into, I think there's two ways to answer this. One is from the perspective of international selling, there is going to be additional risk, especially in areas where there's not tracking available. Two, eBay can do something about that, right? eBay can help that further, and that's where our global shipping platform is coming into play here. So we call it GSP, and this will allow sellers to send the item domestically. When they're sending that item domestically, it's like sending it to the warehouse in Kentucky with part of the eBay ecosystem. That warehouse now sends it off to the buyer in another country, and now that seller affords all of those protections as they're shipping domestically. Everything from the auto 5-star to the item not received protections, these protections go with the GSP program. So that's something, I think from a rollout perspective, we're still in a soft launch. I don't think it's available to everybody, but we're rolling that out pretty aggressively, and it's becoming available to more and more people as we go through the weeks here.
So, Rich, are you saying that I have essentially the same risks as I do domestically, but I get all the benefits of international shipping?
That's exactly right. Should be a marketing guy.
You know, and I think that what you just talked on is something that I've read through a lot of the other questions that highlights, which is, and I think it goes back a bit to the INR, which is most of my issues are coming from international buyers. A lot of them are coming from our buyer protection program has a 45-day case closure, and yet the item is not received, yet the buyer is compelled to file a case. And so eventually they wind up with the item as well as the refund because we just don't have that tracking. And I agree GSP will cover that. The other thing just to highlight on this one is our buyer protection team is well aware of this situation, and we're trying to think through what is the right answer for both buyer and seller in these cases. So again, this is stuff we hear you in the community. I wish it was as simple as flipping a switch, but there's a number of factors that we have to consider as we do this. It will be coming soon.
Yeah. Well, while we're on the topic of INRs, I know you covered this a little bit, Jonathan, in your presentation, but is there any protection for a seller when a buyer says they never received a package? Does the seller always have to refund money when the post office says it was delivered, but the person says they've never received it.
So actually, in those instances, if the post office says that the item was delivered, and/or if there was signature confirmation if the item was $250 or more, from our side, we consider that seller to be protected, and then then eBay deals with the buyer, and sometimes we will pay the buyer out as a courtesy. Other times we will tell the buyer, I'm sorry, but that's from a seller standpoint. If you have the delivery confirmation, then you are off the hook.
And
That's
part
correct.
of that, and actually, Christy, this is a good question for you, given that you're on the line. Part of there's a concern here, right? And one of the concerns around the item not received protection is if one of our conditions stipulates that it was received or sent out within the handling time specified on the listing. Can you tell us about what happens if we have delivery confirmation, but it shows that it was sent after the handling time period, or the seller is still covered in those use cases?
Good question, Rich. So the question is, what if I basically ship outside of my stated delivery and handling time, but the buyer did receive the item? In those situations, what will happen if the case is escalated to customer support is they will actually have the item returned to you, the seller. So the buyer would never get the opportunity to keep the item and get the refund, but in those situations, like most times, the buyer might be expecting a gift or might be expecting it for a certain time frame. So it's best as sellers we uphold to our commitments, and so you would never lose the item and the money, but we would have the item returned to you, and then you could relist it on the site and go from there. But we want to make sure that we're holding up to the commitments we're making to the buyers.
Great, and thanks for clarifying that, Christy, because I think this is an opportunity for us to make our policy language more clear, because I know we get this question often, and I don't think this is spelled out clear enough in our policy. The way it sounds when reading through the policy is that the seller loses the protection if they don't ship within their stated handling time, and that's not the case. So I know an area
Exactly.
for us to get better at.
And Rich, sorry.
Definitely.
The marketing manager on seller protections over here. We had another question come in for Christy, and I thought if I could interrupt and hand it over to her. Christy, we have a question specifically about the new cases. If we reply to a buyer through a case and they don't answer, is there a way we can close the case? So if the communications are not happening to cases, how do they handle that?
So Anna, I'm so sorry, you were a little bit muffled. Was the question that what happens if the buyer isn't?
Yeah, if we got a question in asking, if we reply to a buyer through a case and they don't answer us, is there a way we as a seller can close the case?
Oh, gotcha. So today there isn't a way that the seller can close the case. And the reason for that is the buyer may be planning to respond and they just are taking some time. But cases do eventually time out where the buyer could no longer escalate to customer support. So the seller cannot close it, but they could also phone in or escalate to customer support and ask them to make the decision. So there are a couple opportunities there that, one, the case may time out depending on how long it's been open, and then secondly, the seller could actually ask customer support to make the decision. But I would just caution sellers in that situation to make sure that that's what you want to do and you have all the information. If there's a tracking number, that you've uploaded it to the case. If there's details about the item, that you've mentioned those in your response in the resolution center. But the seller could ask customer support to make a case, but they would not be able to close it themselves.
Okay, thanks, Christy. And there's one other question just while we're talking about contacting buyers and sellers through the process, if you could answer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, buyers were always encouraged to contact the seller first, and they had to mark a checkbox that said, I have contacted the seller. Often they just checked it without contacting us. Is there a way to verify this? So just want to address this as any of this changing.
Great, thank you. So yeah, the first contact will actually come through the resolution center. So it will be verified. And the good news is, as we've talked about throughout the presentation and the webinar, is that the open cases do not count. So there won't be a negative impact on the seller by having that contact come through the resolution center, and the seller will still have that 3 locked down business days to respond and work it out with the buyer.
Christy, can you talk a little bit about, I know you've mentioned in the past in our discussions, some other advantages to the seller of working out all the communications directly through the resolutions tool itself?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked that, Rich. Thanks for the follow-up question. So the benefit to having the first contact come through the Resolution Center, one of the big benefits is that the seller will have all the tools and resources available to them at the very beginning. So what that means is today if the buyer sends you a message through My Messages saying, I didn't get my item or whatever, and you realize there may have been a mistake and the item wasn't shipped out, and you wish to give them a refund, today you'll have to go to PayPal, process the refund through there, and you won't have any tools and resources to do it. Whereas today, you'll get the contact in the Resolution Center, and you'll have the ability to process a refund right there if you need to. And on the same token, if for whatever reason you want to offer a return or an exchange, you can offer a return right there in the Resolution Center. So it'll be super helpful for sellers to have those tools that are only available today after a case is opened right there when the buyer first contacts them.
Christy, another question related to this topic. Will a seller be able to, or will a buyer be able to open a case in PayPal after going through this process in this new simplified, or this new process for buyer protection?
Good question. So Rich asked, will they be able to open a PayPal case after they go through the eBay buyer protection flow? And the answer is no. Even today, we don't allow a buyer to open a PayPal case after they've opened an eBay buyer protection case. However, the PayPal protections will still exist, and buyers will still have the option to file through PayPal. We do our very best to direct them to eBay and recommend that they file on eBay, but given that PayPal was their payment method, they do still have that option because PayPal protects their payment. And so we do everything in our power to direct them to filing on eBay, but in some cases they can file on PayPal, but you'll never have a situation where you have a case opened in both PayPal and eBay. If one's opened on PayPal, it cannot be opened on eBay, and if one's opened on eBay, it cannot be opened on PayPal. And if by some way the buyer does them at the exact same time, and they're able to file one on both platforms by, using two browsers and doing it at the same time or something, we'll actually close, ideally, the PayPal one, and then move it on to eBay.
Great. Thanks, Christy.
Yeah,
let's move on
you.
to another topic around just the experience that sellers have had with, so I'm going to consolidate a couple of things here around how to talk to someone about seller protections, the level of support they're getting from our customer service team on seller protections, and the one thing that I want to highlight here is the primary way to contact seller protections or let us know that there's a problem is going to go back to what Jonathan had talked about before through our report a buyer. All of that goes through these detection algorithms. It's one of the best sources, again, that I mentioned before, one of the best sources we have to start finding and detecting those problems and fixing that. That's number one. Number two, if you need very specific support on let's say, feedback getting removed, we have a process on the site today, and it's accessible through our ebay.com/seller protection is one place to access it, but also if you just do a search in our help for feedback removal, as an example, you'll be put into our flow instead of our help section, which will guide you into the phone number to call our support center to help get that feedback removed. So that's another option sellers have to work with and contact us. And then I would say number three on this is more of a general comment. One of the things that we've been hearing, both through the questions here as well as when talking to various sellers in these different groups, is eBay can do a better job of making sure the customer support representatives that they talk to are more aware of all of these programs that we have, and I think there's a training opportunity there that they're highlighting to us. So we have been working very closely with our customer support teams to start expanding their level of knowledge on our various programs, making sure that they're getting all of this information on a regular basis. It's a huge team. We have a very large phone support and email support and chat support team for customer support, but we are working diligently to make sure that they're updated with all of this information as we're continuing to make updates throughout the year. So just wanted to acknowledge that I know sometimes there's some pains there. We're working to make that better. Let me jump to another question here, Jonathan. I think this one is this one's related to some of the pieces that you were talking about, which is basic question: how do I know that I have been protected? Or in other words, another one: how do we know if the automated protections have taken place on our account?
Right. So this goes back to our communication out to you monthly through the seller dashboard and/or the You've Been Protected email. Both of those will collapse all of the protections that we put in place into one place. And so as we think through some of our automated protections, we're going to share those with you in different manners. So if you think about the picky buyer or the external events protections, those will show up in terms of negative and neutral feedback and/or low DSRs and cases that have been removed. If you think about just one or two buyers that leave you the vast majority of your negative feedback, we actually called one out specifically on the site, in our communications and on the dashboard. So that's where we're sharing that information back out with you. The other thing, sorry, if I can switch gears, have been reading through some of the questions coming in. It seems like there's a number of follow-ups with GSP. And so let me address those. The other one, I think, Bill, you said that they picked a pope. I appreciate the news update. So around GSP, a couple of things. So somebody asked, what's the price to me to opt into the global shipping program? And the answer there is the price to you is nothing. The price to you is to ship the item to Kentucky, and that's all that you will get paid for. The buyer then pays for any of the customs and duties up front, as well as the shipping of the international portion of the leg. So all of that is what the buyer pays for, and the buyer pays that final price of your item, your domestic shipping, the international leg shipping, and the duties and customs summed up is what the buyer pays. You'll obviously receive your shipping and your price. Ties into a question I think Mike sent in, which is, what happens if I get low DSRs or a negative or neutral feedback because they say that the price is too high, or the buyer says that the price for the GSP program is too high? Great question, Mike. We have policies in place today to actually remove those DSRs and that negative feedback if it's related to the international leg. We are working to get those automated as quickly as we can so that we don't force you to call into customer service. However, it is a phone call today. In that manner, please reach out to them and let them know. If you don't get an acceptable answer back there, feel free to reach out to Kat and one of the organizers, and they can funnel themselves back to me, and we'll make sure that gets reviewed in an appropriate manner.
That's a great idea.
And then the last question.
Before you get to the last question, this is Kat. I'm just letting everybody know that we are down to the last 10 minutes. The guys are doing fantastic. I think this is one of the best eBay presentations I've been to. However, you guys, the listeners, the audience, are doing even better because the questions are pouring in. So please know that we're going to do our best to get to as many as we can in the next 10 minutes, and we are looking at all of your questions. Okay, back to you.
No problem. You guys are. I'm reading here, so I've got one more on this one. So Terry asks, on the international program, if I, as a buyer, offer free shipping on items, how does eBay calculate what I have to pay to ship to Kentucky? Terry, it's just like a normal domestic transaction. So, what they charge to the buyer is zero in that instance. And then the last question that I had was, is this mandatory? And the answer to that one is no, it's not mandatory. We're in pilot. We are in, I believe it's 18 countries, and we're rapidly looking to expand that. But we also just have our training legs on, and this is a new program for us, and quite frankly, across all of the e-commerce industry. It's a very new concept of how do we enable cross-border trade. And so there's a lot of learning kinks that have to get out of the way. However, as eBay sellers, I think we are at the forefront of this. and we will, and we are continuing to push forward.
And Jonathan, I'll make sure that we get these questions around the GSP program back to the team so that we can modify the program as necessary from the seller feedback. Okay?
So I know we don't have a huge amount of time, and there's still a number of questions on the board here. Let me answer another one. So this one says, this one might be for both yourself and myself, Jonathan. In the seller protection workshop in December, Ron Matsuura, which is weird because that's my brother's name, but was questioned about buyers who leave a positive in all those scores. The answer to this is not allowed. And then it goes on to say, how are sellers even supposed to know, right? Let me take the first cut of this answer, and I know Jonathan actually runs this program, so I'll let him chime in as well. When we're saying a buyer who leaves a positive feedback and and all low DSR scores, so we allow that to happen. We allow them to actually do that. That does, though, raise a red flag on our side. So this brings up these buyers are the ones that oftentimes will get queued up for investigation. Someone who it looks like they're trying to hide their activity underneath the anonymity of the DSR program. So the program that Jonathan's running to detect these guys, this is one of the pieces that the algorithm detects, serves up to our agents and makes sure that this is not and what we will see sometimes here is a competitive seller. A seller who knows how the DSR scores could affect another seller on the site. We're tracking that, the ability to see, hey, is this a seller either themselves selling or linked to an account that's selling something in this particular person's category. We might also see this in a retaliatory from a person, again, try to just buy things to get back at a seller they might have had an off experience with in the past. So where we do technically allow that to happen, this is something that raises some red flags on our side, and we're taking action on a number of buyers that go through this type of behavior repeatedly.
I think you've answered that one well, Rich.
Kat, let me ask you a question. How much time do you need at the end? How much time do we have to keep on going through questions?
You keep right on going till the very end, gentlemen. You got 6 minutes. Go, go, go.
Okay, fantastic.
Hey, Linda, sorry, let me ask. There's been a couple of questions on our top-rated seller program. Linda, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Would you love to answer those?
Sure. Happy to answer any questions. So should I tell you what I think I saw, and then maybe if you've got other ones?
Well, here, certainly. Let me dig them up, and I will ask them to you. Oh, wait, are they right? Here we go. Thank you. What happens when someone leaves a low detailed seller rating score, and it pushes you over the limit? I presume that's the 0.5% for top-rated seller, and your top-rated seller discount, and you aren't able to achieve your top-rated seller discount. Then a month later, we found that was actually from a buyer, and that low detailed seller rating was removed after the review. Do I retroactively receive the 20% discount on the final value fees?
So I'll give you the quick and dirty answer, which is not automatically. So systematically, when a low DSR is removed for buyer abuse, for example, we don't automatically pick that up in the billing cycle to acknowledge that you should have received a TRS discount on a previous invoice. But if you do call into customer support, they will absolutely issue you a credit for any lost final value fee discount payout on any invoice you should have been TRS on previously. So we do make sure we try to make you whole. We just don't have a way to automate that process.
That's great to hear, and I'm sure our sellers will appreciate that. And so, as you said, all I have to do is call into customer support, explain the situation, and they will work with me to get the final value fee credited.
Yep, absolutely.
And there was one more question around ETRS that came in. Someone had lost their ETRS status and gotten it back, and they want to know when the 20% discount comes back into play. What is that time period between losing it and getting back into the program and the discounts applying?
Yep, so assuming that you receive it on the 20th, we apply the discounts on your immediately next invoice. So if you're invoiced on the 1st of the month, then the following month you'll see those discount credits come back. And then the other one is the 15th as well. So we're taking the snapshot right after that evaluation cycle runs, and we'll make sure that we give you all of the discounts you deserve for having your top rated plus listings.
Linda, one other similar related question. I know a lot of sellers appreciate the 20% discount, but the search boost is probably one of the unsung heroes of the top rated seller program, as it puts you closer to the top in our best match program, or best match search results. When does a best match come into play following the decision on the 20th?
So Best Match does its thing every day, so it's a daily thing. In fact, it probably has more frequency than just every day, and probably several times a day that we'll come in and check and see where you are as a seller as far as being top-rated seller and what kind of services you offer. So, for example, you just gained your status on the 20th. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't start seeing some of that lift by the very next day on the 21st.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I think those were our EPRS questions, if you want to
Excellent.
get one more.
Let me add one policy suggestion that was made, and the one other thing I love about these forums is some of these suggestions come up. I think we love to get suggestions on how to improve the program. One of them was, can there be something added to the buyer practices policy, where the buyers need to know that we can only ship to the shipping address that they provide. Just something to let them know that they cannot put a different address in the common address and expect us to ship to it. This is a common problem that I have, and I don't think our current buying practices policy has that specific in there. I think this is a great call out because, again, I think this is something that we've heard from our sellers as being an issue. I think it is somewhere in our policy, somewhere on the site, but in this effort to consolidate and bring everything together. We often when we're talking to sellers, say, make sure that you're shipping to the address that's provided and not the one in the comments. So let's make sure that we get this one addressed and properly built into the buyer protection policy. Kat, I know we're at the bottom of the hour here. So
I've got one last 30-second answer, and then, Kat, I think we're probably at the bottom of the hour.
Excellent.
So somebody asked about the $250, and that number's been thrown around as we've talked about the claims or the buyer protection case process. That $250 threshold does not cover any of our seller protection protections. It only signifies when a signature confirmation is required or when it's not. So if your item is over $250, make sure you get signature confirmation. If it's under $250, all you need is delivery confirmation, i.e. tracking that it arrived. That's the difference. If you use our eBay labels platform, we automatically opt you into the right bucket based on the price tag. So
fantastic.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay, Kat, so what I'd love to do is just a real quick closing on my side is, again, thank you very much for joining the webinar today. Kat and Chris, thank you so much for hosting us and having us on the program. I think it's fantastic that we're able to get through most of the questions, probably not all of them. I think a lot still are continuing to come in. We're able to get through a lot of the questions here, but I wanted to just reiterate one more time that the sellers on eBay are bringing so much value in terms of unique items and unique inventory, great deals, fantastic customer experiences. I know there's a lot that we can continue to do to help protect our sellers and create a more fair marketplace, but you're extremely valued here within the organization. We're talking about you every day in terms of how to make your experience better. Keep this feedback coming in, and hopefully we keep up this dialogue in these type of forums and as we get out to meetups and such. So looking forward to meeting a lot of you in the future. So thank you again for joining.
And Rich, if I can pipe in on questions, I know we've gotten some questions in about being on the discussion board and being more active there, and that we said we were going to be doing that, and that we have plans to get out there within the next few weeks. So keep posted on that, as well as I know we couldn't answer every question here today, but from the marketing perspective, I'm the marketing team here, we'll be working to get as many of these questions answered in some FAQs and et cetera on our website. So we actually been using all these meetups, et cetera, to talk to sellers like you to get the common questions in so we can get some of these answered. We know some are very, very specific, but a lot of these are very broad that affect all our sellers, and so we'll be publishing content based on your questions here today. So again, I want to thank you for that. You'll be helping other sellers, and hopefully we'll get that information out soon.
Great. Thanks, Ann. And thanks, Jonathan, Christy, Linda, for joining and helping to answer the questions here.
Thank you all for being here. Chris, Karen, I, and all the sponsors really appreciate you guys giving us access to Inside eBay. I really want to tell you that first slide you guys put together with the 2 pictures of the seller protection team. I was working on the slides last night and I was thinking, this is so cool. They got this whole team of people trying to protect me and my eBay seller account. So thank you. That made me feel really good that you got this whole team there. And the questions were awesome. How do you guys, you attendees, like being part of the marketing team? Isn't that cool? All of those of you that took the time to be here, don't worry if your questions didn't get answered, because what Ann was saying is they're working on a seller protection FAQ, and your questions, at least the general ones, are going to be part of that FAQ. So thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you all, the listeners especially. You make our audience. Be sure to sign up for the Top Rated Seller Webinars newsletter at pagemage.com/Top Rated Seller Webinars. If you have a question that didn't get answered here, as Jonathan said, feel free to send it to any of us, the organizers, or post it on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/groups/TRS webinars. We'll do our best to get you the answer that you need. And make sure you are on the newsletter and on the Facebook page, and that's where we'll announce as soon as we get this recording re-edited and rendered, we'll send that up to our YouTube channel. So you can search the YouTube for the Top Rated Seller Webinars channel, and the PDF will be on the page. So goodbye, everybody. Thanks again for coming, and we'll see you again next month. Bye-bye.